I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. So much to get to, important stuff. Let's check in with Stacy.
Max, well, we have a headline here suggesting that the Bank of America analysts are ready to take on the widowmaker, and that is betting against U.S. government bonds, which have been in a bull market, for what, 45 years? Something like that. A long time, many decades. So Bank of America, we believe we are at a secular turning point for both inflation and interest rates with, quote, new central bank mandates, excess fiscal stimulus, including UBI, less globalization, fading deflation from disruption and demographics. The 40-year bull market in bonds is over, they say. They say it's over, Max, and here's their chart. Looking at that top dark blue line is deflation assets and how they have performed over the past few decades. And they've outperformed the inflation assets. We've been having deflation, they say. And they count inflation assets, which they predict will outperform in the next 10 years, commodities, real estate, tips, EAFE, U.S. banks, value, and cash, which is weird to put cash, of course, in an inflation asset. EAFE is Europe, Australasia, and Far East. Deflation assets are government bonds, U.S. investment grade, S&P 500, U.S. consumer discretionary growth, and U.S. high yield bonds.
Well, this is the big one, the big enchilada, the big bull market of the past 40 years that has been the foundation upon which the economy around the world, particularly in the United States, has been built. Because with that big deflation trade, as it's being referred to, you end up having lower interest rates. Lower interest rates. That's the key. That's been keeping the American dominance rolling for 40 years, because every time there's a mistake, like in 2008, for example, or the dot-com crash, or the stock market crash of 1987, or the bull market crash of 1993, the answer has always been to extend and pretend. And that means to extend the maturity out to longer maturity dates and watch those maturities rise in value, because the central bank has been instrumental in assisting in this bull market in bonds by purchasing a lot of this paper to keep interest rates artificially low. And that's the story of the past 40 years. If Bank of America is correct and the bull market in bonds is over and interest rates are going to start going up, that means that pretty much 90% of the American economy and the global economy will start to become insolvent.
So they're basically identifying trends that you and I have pointed out here for the last few years and increasingly making it vocal, like deglobalization. They're now seeing that. And that's because of the Thucydides trap. America doesn't like to see China overtaking it, but it is overtaking us. So we will withdraw from the world. We'll try to make sure that nobody else can trade with China. We'll introduce tariffs on China, as we have done, and Biden has yet to remove the tariffs that Trump introduced on many of the goods coming out of China. We've introduced tariffs on goods from Canada and Europe. So I'm not sure if Biden has yet considered even removing those. He's also saying where there's a fading deflation effect. So a lot of that deflation effect has been from the central banks, as you've identified, because central banks can't print money, they can print credit, and the credit is deflationary because that credit can never be paid back. So therefore, it's always deflationary. It's going to collapse all the time. But also that technological advancements have created a lot of deflation, and those are going to be over necessarily because of the fact of deglobalization, and then demographics. So the boomers are dying off, but the millennial and Z are inheriting the wealth. They're also, they have their own entire economy, structural economy based on like Bitcoin and digital assets and digital existence.
If the U.S. wanted to take another route here in 2021 and instead decide that they were going to try to compete with China by biting the bullet and taking the hit to the economy by introducing manufacturing back into the economy, and a more prudent lifestyle to try to rein in the excesses and to go head to head with China on the competitive basis. That would be the smart thing to do. But instead, as you point out, they're deglobalizing, they're withdrawing, they're shrinking because China is moving ahead, and they're becoming belligerent. And what usually happens is, as many have pointed out, currency war leads to trade war, leads to hot war. So the U.S., sadly, instead of just out there competing with China, like, okay, you know what, you guys, we're tired of you out competing us. We're going to compete. They're going to probably get, violent, which is sad, but predictable.
They're also pointing out there that you're starting to see for the first time fiscal stimulus from the U.S. government. It's always been, credit stimulus from the central banks or money given to bankers who then don't circulate the money. That's why we've had the money velocity collapse in that same time of this huge surge in deflation assets. Deflation was reigning while banks, just the wealthy, the financial system hoarded all that credit. They didn't spread it to the ordinary person. Now it's spreading to the ordinary person. They're having airdrops in their bank accounts almost quarterly at this point, but soon they're hoping, many in Congress are hoping it'll be monthly or even weekly, that people will be getting like $2,000 a week, which of course is like far more money than most of the world makes. But here, and far more money than the rest of the world makes, actually going out and working really hard in a factory all day, manufacturing all the goods that we're buying. Whereas, basically they just want to pay several times the global average salary for people to just stay home forever, eternity from here on out, in terms of how the structure of this economy is going forward. Because once you get that free money, once you live like a banker, who's going to ever give that up?
Well, you make a good point there, that you have a situation now where all the money printing that's been going on, or the credit expansion, as you point out, in terms of what central banks do, has also seen record lows in money velocity, right? The money just is parked on the banks, and the banks keep it, essentially, and they keep it and they buy stuff for themselves. To put it in the most basic terms, they don't want to distribute it. They'd rather, as a matter of fact, this latest stimulus check, according to a lot of the banks now, they're holding on to it. They're not going to distribute it for another week or two, simply because they like to get it and use it and spend it and give themselves bonuses and buy apartments and yachts and stuff. That's the only reason. Okay, so the government is saying, you know what, there's no way to rein in the bankers. Eric Holder said they're above the law. We can't prosecute. They're made men, effectively, like in the mafia that is the American economy. So they're just going to print money and airdrop it with these stimulus checks, and that's going to have the effect of causing a real inflationary nightmare and the bond market to tip over into a secular bear market and rising interest rates, which will be the final nail.
Right, that those stimulus checks, a lot of it is being held by the major banks, kind of like in a Robin Hood way. They're front running your trades, right? They know before they release the money to you that you're going to mostly go and speculate in the stock market. So they're going to front run all your trades. So again, of course, like we haven't received any stimulus ever in this whole pandemic, and we won't. But our stock portfolio, our house price has gone up far, far more than any of the stimulus. So that's the way this unfair system works, of course.
Right. Back in the day, the 80s and early 90s, there was a term heard often called check kiting. Check kiting. Kidder Peabody was busted. They in turn went out of business or were bought out.
That was a stock brokerage?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what they did after they got rid of the competition, Kidder Peabody, they made check kiting legal. And that's check kiting. So the government sends the money to the banks. The banks check kite, essentially. They, as you point out, they use the money first. They front run everybody else. So a lot of this has been the history of the past 40 years during this bull market, is that banks figure out new ways to rip people off. They get caught. And what they do is they change the law or introduce new laws. And if there is any problems, they extend and pretend. They just make the maturities longer and the coupons lower. But now it looks like that big American game of fraud, which is the American business model, is coming to an end.
Well, here's another remarkable story. This one is so crazy because, okay, so we have all of the stimulus checks, thousands of dollars. Remember, income is up 14% in the past year, mostly because of transfer from the government to the people. And it's something like over 20% of all income now is provided by the government. Then Biden promises to wipe away student debt. And there's, debates whether he wants 10,000, Chuck Schumer wants 50,000 wiped out. So a huge amount of money, debt, deflation disappears. Now, Representative Ilhan Omar, this is pretty remarkable. I introduced, she said, the Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act, which would permanently cancel all rent and mortgage payments until April 2022. Anybody who hasn't paid their rent or mortgage for the past year, and many people haven't, and some suckers did choose to pay their rent and mortgage, and they could have just not paid it because apparently all of that's going to be wiped off. Whatever you owed, they're just going to cancel it permanently, including for the next year ahead. Lots of people are in the comments on this saying, yes, stick it to the landlords. Yes, Warren Buffett and Blackstone, big landlords. Yes, stick it to them. Well, if you read further down, basically the taxpayer is going to pay those landlords, right? So the taxpayer is going to pay all the student debts, right? Because all that money went to the universities and the administrators, right? They've already collected the cash and bought houses or stocks or whatever. So they've had it. That cash is being paid off. The debts are being paid off by the taxpayer. Here, the taxpayer is going to pay off all the rents and mortgages. So pretty much everything in the economy is state-owned. All the bonds are state-owned. All the debts are state-owned. The houses, mortgages are state-owned. Student debts are state-owned. So that's the situation we find ourselves in.
Well, what you're describing there, the minimum monthly payments, the forgiveness of rent, state ownership of everything. I actually read a book in college that explained the whole thing. And they kind of laid out exactly what you just said. It's not read often now. It's kind of famous though. It's called the Communist Manifesto. And it explains this exact political theory.
Well, I mean, our founding fathers, again, you're not allowed to teach the founding fathers in America anymore, but nevertheless, they did predict that once the citizens realized that they could control the printing press, then we were doomed. So I'm just saying, once you give people free rent, and once you give people free, weekly payments into their bank account where they don't have to do anything, who doesn't want that, right? I'd love to not pay a mortgage or rent. I would love to be just people send me money for no reason. I would love that. But, I just think once it sets in, it's going to be hard to unwind. Just like QE is hard to unwind, these sort of policies will be hard to unwind.
Well, comrades, we're going to have to take a little break. But when we come back, much more coming your way, Ski. Don't go away, Ski. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to the legendary Karl Denninger of market-ticker.org. Karl, great to see you again.
Good to see you too. It's a long time no see.
Well, we need to pick your brain here. The U.S. government has printed trillions upon trillions in the past 12 months. Is it really this easy, Karl? Are there any costs we might want to be leery of? Karl.
Oh, I don't know. Retail prices of gasoline have kind of gone through the moon. The futures price on gas has roughly doubled in the last 4 months. I can't imagine why that would cause anybody any consternation. I mean, I was paying well under $2 a few months ago, and I just drove by the gas station a couple hours ago, and it was $2.69. I guess if you own a diesel vehicle, it's not so bad because with freight volumes being a little down and, not so many people traveling with all the COOF stuff, it's, the trucks are not running as much. And so as a result, the demand for diesel's a little less. There used to be a much wider gap between those two prices than there is now. But most of us drive gas-powered cars, don't we? Oh, wait. You too could have an electric-powered vehicle, which works just great until the windmills aren't working. And then, got a little problem there too, right?
You're talking about some inflation, or inflation is starting to make itself known. So my question is that for many years during massive money printing, there was deflation. That's what we heard all the time. And there was a big debate about, is it inflation? Is it deflation? Are they printing credit or are they printing money? But it seems that we've hit an inflection point. It seems like whatever they were doing before, it's not exactly resulting in the same thing. And we're entering a new era. I think Bank of America just said the 40-year bull market in bonds is over. So they're also looking for a change, possibly a secular bull move in commodities, which would be inflationary. Also, a bear move finally in bond prices. What's different now than last year or the year before? How come the money printing now suddenly has some traction, Karl?
It's always a function of supply and demand, just like with anything else. And I don't know where these analysts get the idea that commodity inflation is starting. If you've looked at the price of lumber, for example, random board feet, it's roughly doubled. I'm not quite so sure how you'd consider that just a little inflation. I mean, it's not a big deal unless you want to do something like build a house or put a new roof on and you got some rotted boards up on top and need to replace it, that kind of thing. So the problem with money printing is that the credit goes into the system and it ultimately always ends up in the price level. But the masters of the universe folks love it when it shows up in places like stock prices because, boy, that doesn't hurt you. You go to the grocery store, that doesn't do anything bad to your grocery bill. And it does wonderful things to all the rich people that have a lot of their money in the stock market. There's this chestnut that it's beneficial to you if it shows up in your house price, but that's actually false because you can't monetize it. You need a place to live. So if you sell a bubble house, you have to buy another bubble house. You gain nothing. The only real way to monetize it is to die. That makes your heirs happy with the appreciation that they get, but it probably doesn't make you very happy. So the issue, though, is that ultimately this all winds up showing up in things you care about. And when rates start to go up, then you run into the other problem that inevitably arises, which is that stock prices are essentially a discount on cash flow. I mean, when you get down to it, that's what they are. And when the cost of cash flow goes up because the cost of borrowing goes up, i.e. interest rates rise, then that multiple shrinks. And so if we were to see, for example, the 10-year Treasury, trade at 5 or 6, you'd take 30 to 40% off the current price of equities immediately because most of these companies are fairly highly levered. And the ones that have no assets behind it have nothing other than their operating cash flow to run on. So, an industrial company that actually makes steel still has steel to produce. But a zero asset firm such as Amazon, people think of Amazon as having, they have all these warehouses. Well, how much is a used computer worth in today's world? What, 5 cents on the dollar, what you paid for it a year ago or 2 years ago? So for all intents and purposes, that's an asset-free business. And all they have is that operating cash turn. That's where their price comes from.
So many of these companies are, for example, Airbnb owns no hotels. Amazon has just warehouses full of stuff. It's essentially a software company. And you go right down the list. With Uber, they don't own the cars, et cetera. So we are beholden to the very thin margins tied to technological improvements and the ability to borrow money at near 0% for so many of these companies. And as you're saying, any uptick in rates at all, it has a really huge impact on the operating leverage of just about every company out there because every company's become a software company in that regard, as you've described. But two things. So for the past 20 years, the central banks have been able to keep a lid on rates by doing things like quantitative easing and other machinations of the central bank. And second of all, the dollar has remained pretty firm throughout all this. Which doesn't show a lot of inflation in terms of where the dollar is at really necessarily. So my question to Karl is, we've been talking about this for years. Is the central bank finally out of tricks? Are they reaching into the magic bag of tricks and coming up empty finally? And will the dollar finally start to also show that they've run out of tricks, Karl?
I don't know that they've necessarily run out of tricks. I just think they've run out of effective tricks. I mean, they're going to continue to reach into the bag. But what color ball is going to come out of the bag? This is not the first time the Federal Reserve's tried this. If you remember, there was an entire era of rate repression that happened after World War II. They got away with this for 20 plus years. They built up enormous iniquities and distortions in the system. Richard Nixon actually, according to reports, put Burns up against the wall, literally assaulted him, insisting that he keep rates low for him. And of course, we all know what happened during Jimmy Carter's presidency when that didn't work out so good, right? So there is a reckoning coming, but do recall that during all that time, the dollar never collapsed. And the reason is that all the central banks around the world have the same sort of general concept of what they want to do. So if you have the same kind of a situation arise, for example, with the ECB, then the ECB is forced into the same box that the Federal Reserve is forced into, and yet the dollar being a floating exchange rate currency, yes, it will probably decline from where it is now. But, people, I even back in the 07, 08 timeframe was looking at the possibility that DX could trade at 40. Obviously, that didn't happen. Okay, well, when what you see is the mechanism doesn't occur, you go look for why. Why were you wrong? And essentially, the essence of it is that, yeah, there'll be depreciation, but I don't think there's going to be a collapse in the price of the dollar. Simply because every other central bank is going to get shoved into the same box.
We speak about printing money, and it's a catch-all term, and it refers to a few different things. And so my question is this. Right now, the government is sending out checks to people to get a check from the government. And that's a different kind of money printing. That's actually helicopter money. That's money, that's M1 money, I think, if I'm not wrong. And that's different than what's been going on before that with, let's say, Fed expanding credit, which is a part of the plumbing of the money creation. Can you go into a little bit, am I right to say that this sending out checks is a different kind of animal and it would have a different consequence and probably a more inflationary consequence, Karl?
I fully expect it to have a much stronger inflationary consequence. At its core, everything the Fed does is not actually the Fed. If you think about it, it is Congress that borrows up the cash and prints it. Okay, the Fed supports congressional actions, but it's Congress that does it. So really the question is, do we trickle it down or do we just hand it to people? And when you put it into productive things like building bridges and Eisenhower's roads, the Eisenhower Expressway system, things like this, you get a different multiplication fact than if you just hand people cash. When you hand people cash, there's no multiplication effect. I go out and I spend it on food, I spend it on booze, maybe I make my car payment with it. But there's no real multiplication. When you build productive assets with it, as Eisenhower did with the Eisenhower Expressway system, that does have a multiplicative effect. So I think there is a quantitative difference of substance. But one of the things that's very, very difficult for politicians to do is ever walk away from any of this. When you look at, okay, we're handing out $1,400 checks, but maybe the longer term and worse problem is what we're doing with these child credits in the tax code, where we're taking what used to be the EITC on a fairly narrow basis, and we're essentially codifying that in at about double the level. And that may be permanent because can you imagine a politician trying to take that back? Okay, what does that do to the price level over years? Remember that Johnson said, Great Society. We're going to get rid of poverty in the United States. Right, this was what he said we were going to accomplish with his programs. Well, we didn't get rid of poverty; we made it worse. Now we got the same talk coming out of Pelosi and AOC and all these other guys. Oh, by the way, we're going to cut child poverty by 80% by increasing these child taxes. Go ahead and try to take those back 2 years from now. See how well that works out.
Get my payment. It's been trending on Twitter. People are calling them the Biden bucks. After a year of getting paid more to not work, with all these benefits passing through, how are they going to go? Why should they go back to work? Number one, and number two, if they're demonstrating you can just print money out of thin air by the trillions, aren't people going to start asking why we pay taxes, Karl?
Well, yeah, of course they will. And I mean, I have a niece that works at a big box store in one of the northern states, and she had to work during the entire COVID thing. And her next door neighbor was literally 6 o'clock in the morning. She'd get up to go to work, and he's still smoking bong hits with the smoke coming out of his windows because he's getting $600 a week to sit at home. All right. Well, so what do you do to the wage level if I can quit and collect that money? Now, theoretically, you're not supposed to be able to do that, but we all know that these systems get gamed. So I don't know how ends up stopping this other than the fact that it's going to show up in the price level. And what I have said really since I started writing on this stuff is, doesn't matter how many dollars you have. What matters is what they buy.
Yeah, your purchasing power is collapsing. We have about 30 seconds. What's the problem with gold, Karl? How come it hasn't moved? We got about 30 seconds.
Because it's always been a terrible inflation hedge. It's a good geopolitical activity hedge. You want to hedge inflation, buy common stocks.
All right, Karl Denninger. Well said. Great to see you again. You look healthy. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Thanks for being on Keiser Report.
Thank you. Anytime.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank our guest, Karl Denninger of market-ticker.org. Until next time, bye, y'all.